It's great seeing Jon dancing in the background there while that's going on. But yeah, we need to bring him on in a second. But before we get there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where in the world you happen to be. My name is Christopher Harrison. This is Web Wednesday, the show where we bring on some really cool people to chat about all things web dev. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined yet again by Jon Galloway. It feels like we've done like a ton of content together over the years. And today, he's going to be talking to us about Razer, which is a server-side component for MVC pages for setting up the UI. He's going to talk a little bit about why you might want to use it, how that syntax works, and a lot of tips and tricks to help get you started. But you didn't come here to listen to me talk about it. You came to listen to Jon talk about it. I'm working with a little bit of new software, so if things are a little bit sort of like buggy as we move around here and I like update the background real quick, I apologize for all of that. But in the meantime, Jon, thanks for coming back on again.
Yeah, this is great. I'm always happy to join.
Always happy to have you here. How's life? How's everything?
Things are good. It's cooling down. We got some hail here, which in San Diego is like, what is this ice falling from the sky? It was pretty crazy. So, but yeah, things are good.
Good. Yeah, for anybody who's not familiar with like the geography, San Diego's like bottom left-hand corner of the US. And even though it's against the water, ironically, it's very much a desert. So like that style of rain and so forth, it's just not common. You just don't see it all that often.
Yeah, not at all. And we're busy lately. We're getting ready for .NET 6 to ship in November and .NET Conf coming up, and just a lot of cool, exciting things kind of building up around that. So.
I love that. Yeah, we actually had Maria Nagaga on about, I don't know, maybe about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. What is time anymore? But we had her on introducing Minimal API, which I'm like super excited about. I'm really jazzed to see like that style of syntax make its way into .NET.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to see it just kind of simplifying and removing extra code that you don't really need, and it's like, when you look at like file a new project and it's like, do I really need 50 using statements and a namespace and all that? Can I maybe add that in as I need it? So I'm so glad for the work Maria and friends are doing on this.
I agree completely. And you also, I know, had serverless conf this morning. What was what is serverless conf and what all did you talk about?
Yeah, well, so there's all kinds of serverless technologies going on at Microsoft and Azure. There's things like like functions and logic apps and Power Automate and just all these ways that you can build applications and do things with computers. I like to think of my job not as a programmer, but somebody that gets things done using computers, right? And so like extra code that I don't have to write, that's extra code to debug, to worry about source control, to worry about, like maintenance, to figure out why it didn't run on a leap year, like all this weird stuff, right? And also, when you're working with all these different systems that have to integrate together, you have to worry about authentication. And now you're dealing with OAuth tokens and how come I can't sign in, or this thing used to work last week, but now it can't connect and all that stuff. So one of the cool things with all these serverless technologies is you can just authenticate in the system and then off you go. So James Montemagno and I led the keynote this morning, and we talked about how we built a serverless army to run all the behind-the-scenes things in .NET land. So I work on the .NET community team, and we have tons of different things we do with like .NET Live TV. We have 10 live streaming shows now, and we have to deal with all the like scheduling the shows, making sure the website's updated, handling all the analytics and sending out the stats and building reports. And then we also help manage all the blog posts and all the .NET blog posts. There's all kinds of work going in and scheduling them, so they're not too many of them going out on the same day or not going out on a Friday, and coordinating and handling the review. That stuff, we used to do all that manually, and tons of pull requests and emails back and forth. So anyways, James and I have just been kind of playing with this stuff over time. And after a while, we're like, wow, we built all this cool stuff. So the serverless conf team contacted us and said, hey, would you be interested in keynoting? And we're like, would we? Like, we have so much cool stuff to show off. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love that. I also just like it's such a good reminder about like building tools and that old chart of, you know, the amount of time that it's going to take if you keep doing it manually. And so now you build the tool, and yeah, that first time it's going to take quite a long time, but once you have it built, then things become far easier. I also did get a kick out of you mentioning like the struggles of dealing with OAuth, because I do a couple of things with like, you know, obviously live broadcasting and so forth. And so I've been trying to automate a few processes. And one of the things I wanted to be able to automate was going to require OAuth. And I took a look at it and I went, you know, the ROI for this, it's not going to get there for probably about like 5 years for me to sit down and try and figure this out. So I think I'm just going to keep doing this one manually instead.
Well, so that's where we hit the sweet spot, because we started playing with doing these things using like console apps, or, you know, throwing a bunch of code at it. And then once we figured out, hey, we can orchestrate everything using like Power Automate or a Logic app, and that has all those connections. And then when we need to like run some code, okay, fine, I'll ping an Azure function, throw it a JSON blob, and it'll process it, throw it in a storage. And then like when this timer kicks off again, I'll just, you know, so yeah, so we've got a lot of stuff on the .NET website, which I'll be showing in a bit here. And that is actually like all these background services are managed using things like Power Automate and Azure Functions.
I love that. And we, you know, Power Automate is probably something we should at some point like talk about, because it's an amazingly powerful tool to string together, you know, different activities and so forth. And there's like a bunch of different hooks to it. And you can even like add in your own little bit of code, or you could like bring in some Azure functions if you wanted to do that, and so forth. And like even going in, because I've got like a couple of different DevOps boards that I need to go in and update, and like different default values that need to be put into places and so forth. And now I've got some of that's automated using Power Automate. And it took me about like 15 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to actually figure it out. And now that it's done, you know, I never have to worry about it again. So it's just taking care of that task. It's saving me the bit of time. But also, you know, if you're anything like me, and I know I am, that I'll frequently forget, you know, to do little things. And so knowing that will have taken care of it for me is a huge, huge win.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It's the balance of like how much work I have to do, how much code I have to write, you know, et cetera. If it's something I can get done like during a boring meeting, then hey, sign me up. You know, if it's staying up till 2 debugging, why isn't this thing running? Maybe not. So
right. And really, aren't all meetings boring?
I mean, I'm not going to tell you whether or not I'm tweaking my Power Apps right now, but.
Wow. All right. Well, why don't we sort of transition awkwardly then into talking about Razer? So, what is Razer, and you know, maybe what is MVC as well?
Yeah. So, okay. There's kind of a history lesson, which is interesting to some people and not to others, right? But ASP.NET started as ASP.NET Web Forms, and it was a very control-based way of building web applications. And over time, we wanted to have a little bit more separation of concerns, and so we have MVC. And MVC's been around for a while now, and it's very similar and inspired to things like Ruby on Rails, and you know, in Node land, you've got like Express and other things like that. But the idea is you have a controller, and then you have a view, and then the controller also uses model objects, and then a bunch of other things, services and things. But when you make a request, it hits the controller does some stuff, and it returns a view. And your view is really your kind of front end. So that's where you're going to put your HTML plus a little bit of extra code to say, here's how to update that HTML. So, and this right now, I'm talking mostly about server side, although the lines blur a bit when we move, because you can also use Razer with Blazor. which is a front-end technology. So when MVC first came out, it used the same web forms view engine. So it's a very kind of, there's a lot of extra syntax in it. It was very verbose. And later, Razer came out, and Razer is this kind of cool way of it's mostly HTML, and then you can put in as much C# code as you want. And so that is a language that's used both for MVC, so it's used for the views in MVC, but it's also used for Razer pages. So, and then now that Blazor is a thing, Blazor is a way of building front-end web applications. So you can compare it to like Angular or React. So it's a way of building with components and building front end and places where you're going to have a lot more user interaction in the browser. But that uses Blazor syntax as well. So
okay,
yeah. So what I like about it is it's a way that I can, I don't have to learn a new syntax for writing front end or server side. Writing that kind of front end code. And then it also is a nice way where I can leverage all my HTML knowledge and skills. So I don't have to kind of write some weird language that's going to be converted into HTML or something. It's just HTML with C# where I want it.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. And that, at least with Razer then, if we take Blazor out of the equation, just trying to make sure that we're differentiating each one here, then all of that is going to be running on the server. And so everything's then going to be rendered on the server, and the only thing that's then going to be emitted and sent down to the client is just the HTML, CSS, and then whatever little bit of JavaScript is needed to like update the page and so forth. So you're not talking then, it sounds like, about having some like front-end framework using like React and so forth. And that's obviously like, it seems in a lot of ways like this is what all the cool kids are doing, is they're using React or they're using some form of full stack development and a front-end framework. Why might someone consider using MVC Razer and doing everything on the server side?
Well, which is a great question. I think that a lot of it, there's a lot of good reasons. I actually have a favorite blog post that came out kind of recently from the 18F group and I may have shared it last time I was on. It's an 18F group that's actually consults for the US government. And it's industry professionals that, do like, I don't know, sabbatical or whatever, where they work with government to advise them. They wrote a thing that said basically advice on simplicity and maintenance advantages of starting simple and only bringing in complexity as you need it. So the idea is that if you start by jumping directly into something like React or Angular, in a lot of cases it's overkill, and it can slow you down in a lot of ways. So I'm actually trying to Google it up right now.
Yeah. Google it using Bing.
Yeah, so the idea here is that you want to start with the simplest architecture you can, and then you kind of build up as you go. So here, if I can, let me see if I've got 7 screens open now.
I think you've got the right one.
Cool. Yep, I'm ready to share it. Yeah, so this is their recommendation, and I'm partly sharing, like, these were all my deeply held beliefs beforehand. I'm only sharing it because now I can appeal to authority and someone else has written it up better than I explained it before. But they basically talk through the advantages of a simpler option. So cost-effective maintenance, accessibility, et cetera. There's all these things like, these front-end frameworks provide you ways to build accessible things, but if you just build web standard HTML, it's going to be accessible, right? So those are all those reasons. And then they talk through the layers of technology and what you can start with. So what they say is actually, if you can build a static website, then just do it. Like if you are building just information that doesn't change or changes very rarely, just do static. There's no server processing at all. There's no front end code. There's no code to go wrong, really, right? You're just serving information. And this is the old web, right? This is how Web 1.0 worked. It was just HTML, JavaScript, maybe a little tiny bit, and then CSS and images. And then they kind of work through the things. Okay, if that won't work, then, so first start with static, then do server rendered, which is a lot of what I'm talking about here, which is Razer Pages and MVC. And then if that won't work, then try just, like a little bit of JavaScript. Don't immediately jump to, a full front end framework. And then over time, if you need to, move to a single page application. So there's a lot of advantages with just kind of starting with what do I actually need? And I've worked with some code recently where it was a full React application. There's a whole build process. There's all this stuff, and here's all the I do npm install, and it takes a half an hour, and it's like I am updating like a tiny little block of text. Like, what are we doing here? It's crazy. So React and Angular are awesome technologies. They do so much cool stuff. They power so many neat things on the internet. Nothing against them, but the entire internet does not have to be React and Angular.
I agree. No, that's fine. And like part of my get off my lawn sort of rant here is like, once and feel free to at me. That's fine. I will absolutely take this. Is like the fact that Webpack has to exist, and I'm not bashing Webpack specifically, but the fact that that has to exist means we've sort of lost the plot. Like if I have to write code just to get my code to emit to something, like we've lost our way here. And it's also like I openly admit I don't do Webpack. I know very little about it. That I will always use something like Vite or Snowpack or Parcel, something that's gonna do an auto bundling. And yeah, I'll have to go in and do some level of configuration. But I mean, like that's one thing. Like having to go in and update a JSON file and just tell it, hey, this is the tech that I'm using, or like this is where my source folders are and so forth. Like that's fine. Like I would be doing that even if I was, right-clicking on a project in Visual Studio and setting the properties for my build output. Like that's fine. But if I'm having to debug JavaScript just to get my JavaScript emitted, we've lost the plot here.
Well, and it's the whole, going back even to some of the stuff we were talking about serverless, it's the work for the advantage, right? It's the return on my investment. And for a lot of things, it's like, do I really need like a whole build process? And do I need to manage a bunch of packages? And I need to do all this just to serve some mostly static content, or some content that's doesn't need that interactivity. So like as an example, I've got the .NET website up here. So this is a site I contribute to. We help build things. Now, a lot of this site, like we get millions of hits every month. Like and this site can't go down. Like we really, it's important. People need to be able to access the information here. They need to be able to download .NET and stuff. So there's a really good kind of balance in here. This is actually mostly built with Razer Pages with some backend services. But if you look at this site, like most of it's not that dynamic, and some of the parts that are really can be rendered on the server. I don't need to download a couple of megabytes of JavaScript to render this page to you. Like this, it's going to be the same. You come here next week, it'll look pretty much the same, So, yeah. So, and partly this is my, I don't know how smooth of a transition it is, but in talking about like where Razer Pages and MVC fit in, like if you go to the .NET website, so here's our kind of ASP.NET section. So ASP.NET is just building web apps with .NET. And Blazor is pretty hot right now, partly because everyone's like super focused on front-end dev, and Blazor is a way that you can do front-end dev with .NET, which is pretty cool. There's also, like, if you look across the different types of web apps, this is some of the different stuff. And here you're seeing Razer pop up, right? So this is how there's Blazor for interactive, there's MVC and Razer Pages. And then this is that Razer syntax. And then, so this is something, where there's a whole syntax to it, but I think the best way to get into it is just kind of learn by doing. So we have some different, like learning materials on the site. This is, all sorts of different, some people learn with video or with tutorials or things. So we've got that all listed here. One thing that I got to contribute to recently is this Let's Learn.net. So Let's Learn.net, we did an event at the end of August, and this was a 2-hour course that I taught. And what I went through was this module here, Create Web UI with ASP.NET Core. So this course is mostly about Razer and about how to build things and how to do things like handle a simple form submission. So there's a little bit of back-end code. There's a lot of the kind of interesting stuff here is in the front end, and this is the creating a page with a form. And I'll go through this code in a second. But what I like about this is, like, here's that back end, here's the front end. And if you look at this, this is almost all HTML. So like a web dev can look at this and go like, oh yeah, that's a div, that's an input, right? Do
you want to zoom in just a scotch, like a couple of real quick control pluses there? Perfect.
So here we've got things like a div, and that div is this is straight HTML. So when Razer sees that, it's just going to render that out. This next line is kind of interesting. It's a label, but then it's got this ASP-4. And so what that does is it lights up the C# brain of Razer, and it processes that. So it goes and it says, okay, well, you've told me that my model is a pizza model. And so then it goes and it binds this in. It says, okay, I'm going to attach this. I'm going to hook this together with this pizza model name. And so it just kind of all the way through, you'll see we've got things like, here's a TD, so standard HTML. But now I want to write out, I'm writing a list of pizzas. So I say, get me the pizza's name. And so this @ sign is magical inside of Razer. That's the turn on your, switch into HTML or into C# mode real quick. So this is nice for a lot of reasons. I can, I can write and control my HTML. I can see exactly what's going to be written out. I don't have to kind of run a build or flip back and forth or whatever to understand that. I can also work with a designer, front-end dev, and they can look at it and they can quickly like write some JavaScript or, write some CSS that's going to interact with this. So that's kind of the overall for that. And I think I've got this open here. I probably have it open because I have everything open on my computer. So this is no exception.
Every window, every browser tab.
Just open everything up, because then I feel like I'm getting the most value for my money with them. Okay, so here's that same page, right? So we've got, probably need to zoom a bit, right?
Yeah. Okay, that's perfect.
Yeah. So one nice thing, like depending on your editor, your IDE, anything that's purple here lights up. And that says that this is that the Razer engine sees something special here. So yeah, so like for instance, we've got form validation. So I've got ASP validation summary, and it's just going to handle that for me. It's going to turn on this automatic form validation. So that's really nice. I don't have to go through and do some special kind of validation logic. I can just run it and it'll generate that for me.
And I want to highlight real quick on that validation that validation is also going to be taking place on the client side. That yes. when we're talking about, hey, this is going to be rendering things on the server, it's absolutely going to be rendering HTML, CSS, but it's also going to be rendering JavaScript as well. So there's things that you really do want taking place on the client side, like validation. That one of the simplest things that you can do for performance is do client side validation. So that way, if something doesn't look right, it's not going to call the server. Infinite scale immediately right there because of that. You want that there on the client. This will still give that to you.
And it's great that you brought that up. And what's really cool about this is it's the best of both. You get client and server side validation. So what that means is, like you said, you get the scale and you make your users happy by validating the form as they're typing the information in. And then let's say they are a hacker and they go through and submit something, like around that, or say JavaScript is turned off on their computer or whatever else, right? Say I've got some weird bug happen and the JavaScript didn't load or something. We also get that validation on the server as well. So that's pretty cool. Let me run this real quick, and I can just show what it looks like. So this is a simple list of pizzas, and we can just go through and add pizzas to a list. And as it's spinning
just making
that
me
up,
hungry. I've been hungry like all day, and so I appreciate that you're just gonna go with a pizza example just to make me more hungry.
Yep. Yes, I know it's late afternoon. Slice of pizza sounds really good right now. All right, so this is spinning up, and this is this is all within one page where it's going to have a list of pizzas. Oh, this is actually the console. So that is the kind of back-end host as it's spinning up. Don't worry, my screen is not. Okay, so here I've got a pizza list. Let's see that spin. And so I can create a meat lovers pizza. Why not? I can create it with a price of $1 million or whatever that is. Okay, so now I got some validation. So it says the price must be between 1 cent and a $10,000 pizza. That's quite a pizza. But so let's bring it down to $100. Add it, right?
Only $100. Sure. Yeah.
This is premium pizza, Christopher. This is the stuff. Okay, and it's late afternoon. I can charge a premium there too. So here I'm going to hit the add button, and it says name and price are required. Right. So those are important things. So now I'll flip back over to my code, and we'll see how that happened. So there's the front end and back end portions to this. So we've got that validation summary. We've got here where we're binding to a pizza. And now if I look at my backend code for this, so when the form first loads, it gets a list of all the pizzas, and it's going to display those down below. For this validation, that's actually binding against this new pizza. So I told it to bind a new pizza. And then when I post, all I say is, if the model state is invalid, then just return the page and make them fill it out again. Otherwise, it's a valid pizza, so we add it to the list, and then we display the list again. So this is Razer Pages, and this is kind of a simpler layer on top of MVC where you don't have... so a nice thing I like about Razer Pages is that I can also write these little utility methods in here. So here I've got one that's like gluten-free is actually a Boolean. It is gluten-free. And I want to do some special formatting, make that look a little nicer. So I can write any method I want into this page model. And then when we look back here, we'll see when it writes out this list, I say model gluten-free text, and I pass that pizza in. So it's a nice kind of level of it's mostly HTML, but then I can bring in whatever C# code I want there. Even just some simple things like here, I want to do some string interpolation and format the price as a currency. So I can just say, format as currency, and there it goes. So I'm kind of running through this pretty quick because we also want to get to some more advanced features. But I wanted to kind of, for people that are totally new to it or whatever, kind of explain what it is. And then the other neat thing is that there's a whole 2-hour course on it. And there's also a self-guided learning thing, which is out here on Learn, and this is Build a Web UI, which is the link you shared in the chat there.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, this is brand new. This is updated with the latest stuff, and it's something I think you could probably get through in 45 minutes to an hour and get a pretty, by the end of this, you're building a form with validation, you're showing a list of information. So it's, I think, a pretty good start on Razer Pages. And Razer syntax.
Yeah, I'd agree completely, and it's worth highlighting here that main paragraph is this module uses the .NET Core CLI and Visual Studio Code. So in other words, you can run this regardless of your OS. So you don't need to be running Windows to go through this.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a really key point, is that ASP.NET Core is built from the ground up to run everywhere, and so we have people. Like I develop on Mac and Windows. I go back and forth regularly. I deploy things to Docker and to Linux. It's all tested together. I've got team members on the .NET team that only work on Mac, or that develop, like Jeff Fritz on my team works on Ubuntu for the month of October. And so, yeah, it really is, it's not like it kind of, you can make it work. It's like designed for that. So because of that, that's why we're building these Learn modules, like you said, using the CLI and using Visual Studio Code. So you'll see like all the examples in here will tell you what to type. You can go through and do them on Visual Studio, full Visual Studio on Windows if you want, but it's pretty easy to just go through and do this using VS Code and command line. So.
I dig that. Yeah. And honestly, I do all my dev these days on WSL and in Visual Studio Code.
Oh, pretty cool. Yeah. It's great, the variety. And it's neat that for the most part, you can make your own choice and you can switch back and forth. And I don't really have I couldn't tell you without talking to them which of my teammates are using what OS, because it all is the same thing,
Yep. Yeah, it's fantastic. Things have definitely changed over the last handful of years.
Yeah. So what we did with this is I was doing a lot of stuff during the month of July with Razer and Razer Pages, or excuse me, with August, leading up to that Let's Learn event. And, I was curious. I wanted to reach out to my team at Microsoft and just the .NET development team. And I asked them what some of their favorite Razer features were. And I got a whole variety of things. And I just kind of wanted to go through and share some of the top ones with you. So
yeah, let's do it.
So there's this post out on Dev2, and it's just favorite Razer features. And so I'm going to start with Scott Hanselman's, and he picked my favorite, honestly, which is, it's this super simple thing. You can just put cache, and you can cache anything, and it automatically will just cache that thing for that length of time. What's really cool with this, you can, you get that scale because at the back end, you don't have to do any work. It just serves that same cached page over and over. And it just caches the bit that's in that blob of text. So I want to show a cool example of that. And that is, if I go back to the .NET website and I go to community, and on the community page, we added in this conferences and events. So this just went live recently. James and I actually showed some stuff off at Serverless Conf about how we generate this list of stuff using some serverless technologies. But we're hitting some backend services. These two top ones come from a JSON file, which allow us to kind of go in and say, these are our top ones we want to feature. This is tomorrow, by the way. I hope people who are interested in IoT or just want to have fun, come see Cam Soper is going to be building some cool stuff. And then once the event's over, we're going to want to change this out. And so then we'll edit that JSON file. This stuff down below comes from a backend service using Azure Functions and stuff. So I don't want to hit these backend things too often. And I also want the page to be super responsive. So I actually use that inside. Here's the .NET landing page. I'll bring this over. And you'll see here, I use that exact same thing. So it's. Do
you want to set that to 150 again?
Yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah, so I just set at the top, I set cache time of 60 minutes. The default's 20 minutes. I'm not sure why they picked that, but that's what it is. So I enable the cache, and then I set it to 20 minutes after its first hit. And then just because I have been through this enough in the past, people are like, I made a change. When's it going live? I went through and put down a comment down at the bottom. So I just say like, when was the cache built and when will it expire? So, just because I know. And I use this stuff all the time too. I'm like, they added this thing. Why isn't it? Oh yeah, it's cached, right? So I love this cache tag, and it's super, like you said, it's one of those things where you can scale like crazy if you do no work, and this is one of those cases. So anyways, that was something I built recently, and I was really happy to be able to use that. It's actually another small tip that I just wanted to share.
And I want to go back real quick to that cache tag. So that's you're caching just that portion of the page. So the rest of the page could still be dynamic. It's just that portion of the page that's Absolutely. Then going to be cached.
Yep. So, and you can put multiple things like this in a page. So you could have one part of the page is cached for, 30 minutes. One's cached for 2 days and whatever. Now, if it still can rebuild. The cache isn't a guarantee that it's going to be held in memory. It can, if the server's low on memory or whatever, it can start kicking stuff out of memory. But for the most part, you're basically telling it, you can cache this for this period of time, and it'll try and do that for you.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And this is something where, like, if you really look at pages on your site, how often do I need to update this? And, there's this whole thing called micro caching, where certain things, even if you decide I'm going to cache it for 30 seconds, or I'm going to cache this for a minute, that can make a huge difference. If you've got thousands of people hitting a page and it only needs to do that work one time every 30 seconds, that's a huge win.
Yeah, such a simple tip for performance is that if you just stay off the database, you're going to get a ton of scale just by doing those tiny little things.
Yeah, and then if you have to be on the database, like, just do it once. Don't do it over and over and over. Do it occasionally. So
exactly. Yep.
All right, so that's the first one. The next one, this is I don't have an example of this, but this is just a neat thing. So implicit Razer expressions, these are things where you can just call a C# function inside of Razer. So you can just say, like, go do something. What James is showing here is he put in a wait before that. And so you can just say, do this using async await. And what that does is then it frees up those threads. It builds like behind the scenes, .NET builds a state machine for you, and it continues with the work and waits for a callback when that thing's complete. So that do something async could be calling off to a web service. It could be hitting a database. It could be doing some processing. And we don't want to hold up all the rest of the work on the server for that one thing to finish. So this is basically saying, go make a database call, and then when that completes, come back and keep working.
Okay, I dig it. I am going to interrupt real quick because we got, I think, a really interesting question. And I don't know how much unit testing you've done of late, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway, and we can figure it all out from there. But Chris over on Learn TV asked the question, excuse me, I swallowed wrong there. When I went to talk to my company about using Razer Pages instead of React, the question about automated testing, component unit testing, snapshot testing comes up immediately. How does Razer handle that style of testing? Can you do like component and unit testing with Razer?
So that's a phenomenal question. Really, really good question. You can absolutely do that. You can actually do a little bit. I mean, in some ways, you can do more and deeper testing using something like Razer Pages. And the reason is because you can write unit tests directly in the application. But there's also, so there's different levels of testing, right? You can do unit tests, which say, when I call this code, what is the output? And then you can also work up to integration tests, which is kind of more in-depth stuff. But for that specific snapshot testing, there are a lot of good things for doing this, including some libraries. There's a like Verify is one. There are several others that will do that will basically say, here's the HTML I expect from this page, and what is the result. We actually do have, like, it's often this DevOps thing. It's a little hard to show, but we actually do tons of verification on the .NET website as it runs. So when I commit a pull request, or when I create a pull request, it does this verification, and then it tells me everything I did wrong. So yeah, and so this is off. I'm going random here, but docs, Microsoft, ASP.NET Core, Razer Pages, unit testing. I would hope that we have some docs on this too, like integrated tests. This is what I'm thinking of here. So this is the idea where you can go through and do integration tests. There's all different ways of doing this, but this is an example where you call into something and you say, I expect this result. What is it? So
okay.
So and that was part of the design for MVC and Razer Pages, is to be able to say, when I call this method, what is the result?
Right.
So it's definitely a key part of it. I would say too, I forget the person's name, but you said it was Chris that was asking the question.
Yep.
So definitely my Twitter handle's at the bottom, and ping me if you'd like. Be totally happy to kind of go deeper with this if you have more specific questions.
I appreciate that. And it's also just real quick worth calling out that, the other part of it is you also still, of course, you're going to have some level of server-side code. So you might like have controllers or whatever it is that you're using. And all of that is just C# code that's infinitely testable. And I know that there's a lot of great utilities that will allow you to do that type of unit testing as well. So when you're talking about like also wanting to be able to unit test your logic, which you would do if you were, creating a React app, you can absolutely still do that with your server-side C# code.
Yep. And, so yeah, the several things that brings to mind now is, so you can definitely you can test MVC and Razer engines using automation at different levels. And you can say like, when I call this page, what is my response? Or when I call this controller, do I get this specific response back? Then there are other automation sort of things. And I would argue that server-side code is easier to test than deep client-side code, because that requires a full build process and it requires some browser automation or emulation, that sort of thing. Whereas if all you want to say is, when I hit this page, does it include this line of HTML text? That's a lot easier to test.
Right. Yep. Yeah. 100%.
Yep. All right. I've got a next thing I want to get into here. And honestly, that might be a good show also coming up or something, is actually testing with web apps, and that would be one where we could bring people on to do some more kind of in-depth stuff.
If you want to come on and chat, or if you know the right person to come on and chat about unit testing, I would love that. It's a topic that I've been wanting to do a show around for quite a while, but just haven't found the right guest yet. So yeah, and obviously like we're going to need a few, because we're going to need to do some with JavaScript and some with .NET, and then Python and all of that. But just really any unit testing content would be wonderful. So we'll definitely have to make a show happen.
And it's this balance where a lot of the content that we show is kind of like just getting started, and we struggle with that. But in a lot of cases, unless it's a test first development course or a test first development thing, it can be a little bit of overhead to say, create a new project, put some words on the screen. Hey, you just built your first web app. Do we really need to teach you unit testing in that? Now, in some cases you do, if that's your focus is test first development. But if you want to learn like a new concept or fundamental, then that's not always the place to start. But it is really important content. And whenever you go through like the .NET repos, tons of unit tests, like you better believe, and so it's definitely, that is part of how we do development, and we know and care about it, but it's just not something we always teach right at the beginning. So.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It really is. It's sort of that tricky space, and like I try very hard whenever I'm teaching things to always teach best practices, because it's like, this is why we still in 2021 have SQL injection attacks. It's because that you still see sample code out there where you're concatenating out SQL strings, which again, we all know we should never do, but they're trying to approach it from that beginner level. And so like that stuff, I think we can all agree, let's just never teach that again. But when it comes to unit testing, like you could still do quite a bit without necessarily needing unit testing. And so it becomes this really weird area of like, okay, well, where do I introduce it? Because doing it right from Jump Street is not going to be a good learning experience. And then we just sort of forget about it.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let me show tag helpers.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, we got about 15 minutes left. Yeah, go for it.
Well, tag helpers is kind of the majority of what I want to talk about. So tag helpers are really fun. And there's an example, like as you saw all through the application I was showing off earlier, all these things are different tag helpers. So these are HTML tags that have some special sort of processing. And Damian Edwards, PM on the .NET team and a bunch of other stuff, he set up some stuff with tag helpers, with some tag helper pack is what he calls it. So these are custom tag helpers. And so here's an example of an ASP if. And this is a very simple one where he just sets a predicate. And if it's true, do one thing, if not, do another. Here's his example page. And this has things like, these are all these tag helpers that do things like render, select input elements and stuff like that. The cool thing with this is these are very simple, like he's just binding to, he says editor 4 equals birth date, and it automatically shows a calendar picker. So he's got all these custom ones. What's neat with this is you can actually see the source code for it. So I'm going to do one of my favorite tricks of late, which is I'm on a GitHub repo and I'm going to hit the dot key. Isn't that so cool? It brings up an editor. It better do it for me now or I'm going to feel stupid. Come on now. I'm not supposed to do this. All right, fine. It's good that I have it loaded. I did it with another one earlier. So here's the example code. Always have a backup, John. So here's this example, right? So he has this if. So if he puts this ASP if attribute anywhere, and he puts this predicate, so I'll say predicate equals blah, 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 then it just does a quick choice. Does it exist or not? So that's a very, very simple one. He's got another, like a more complex one. This does Markdown. So you can put Markdown in a page and inside this Markdown tag, and it'll automatically render it as HTML. So there's really two tricks in this. One is to use custom HTML helpers or tag helpers, and the other is to write your own. And it's really relatively easy to do that. I will give an example of one that we use inside the .NET website. So that page that I showed before was a list of all these different events in the community. And I wanted to make it so that you could see a list of them. So let me flip back to one of my 40 tabs. So here's list. So I want to be able to hover over it and see the event info. And what was important with that, it needed to be accessible. I did it one way before and it was pretty neat. And then they're like, failed accessibility test. This is not inclusive. And I felt really bad. And so then I was like, okay, what can I do? Well, it turns out Bootstrap has a thing for that. But what was even neater is somebody had already built one. So there's a tag helper that turns on the Bootstrap, that little info thing. So I was like, this is awesome. And so I went over and checked out. So here is this info tag helper. So we use this anywhere in the .NET website. You see that little I tag. This is actually what's happening. So all we have to do is fill in this title, and it's automatically going to write this out. I don't have to worry about writing this in each page and accidentally forgetting to set an ARIA attribute or whatever. This is automatically going to pass, it's going to include the right code there. So I can just go through and bind this. So here, this is a tag helper. I'm saying title equals blah, 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 and then I close it off. So I think this is a great example of Razer, tiny little bit of code, and it's able to kind of be reusable throughout the site. So that is a fancy thing. All right, let me keep flipping.
I also just appreciate you making sure that the page is accessible.
It's something where I have learned more about it recently. I actually signed up to write a module on writing accessible apps with ASP.NET Core, and I got to talk to people and learn, and it was really inspiring, kind of, to think about like how this would. It would do a lot of things. One, it would do the right thing by making it so that our pages were accessible to everybody. Anyone could get to it. And then two is learning that it would help everyone out. Like, obviously, if you do something that improves vision accessibility, of course you want to help blind people be able to use your site. But then also, sometimes I'm working in a place that's got a glare and I can't see my screen well. Or maybe I'm working on a computer that's just got a bad display. Or maybe I want to work on a site that can read something out loud to me so I can, do something else while I'm listening to it. So accessibility really makes the experience better for everybody, And so it's a really key like it's a requirement for any Microsoft websites, and it's something that I've gotten to learn recently and really appreciate. So
yeah, Sarah Higley, who's on the accessibility team, joined for a Web Wednesday quite a while ago. So if anybody's like looking for more information, there we go. My Twitter handle is there. Hit me up, and I will happily share out that link. She's brilliant and just like really helped shed a lot of light onto that subject. So,
I actually learned a ton from Sarah. Sarah was one of the people where I was like, teach me, I need to learn. And I wrote that module for MS Learn on accessibility with ASP.NET Core, and she helped review it. And then we did a Let's Learn event, and she helped teach that. It's some really cool stuff. So.
Yep. Yeah.
So that is tag helpers.
9 minutes.
Okay. I'm going to skip over templated components. That's a little more advanced. View helper components are interesting and a little confusing. But if you've got something in a website that you want to use throughout the site, so maybe you've got like shopping list and you want it throughout your entire website, any page you go to, you want to see stuff that's in your shopping cart. Or if you want to see, whatever it is, think about those like standard things you want anywhere in your site. So what's neat here, this is an example where it's a list of things, and then they've created a tag helper, a view component, and then they light it up in the page by saying, so they've enabled the view component to be displayed as a tag helper. And so the end result of this, I just want to like explain, it is a thing people can do. But once I create this view component, then I can just do this VC priority list. And so it lights up. So they have a whole thing on how to do this in the docs. Yes, it's definitely something where view components are something where once you need it, then you're like, this is perfect. This solves a problem. It's something I use very, very rarely. But the idea is it's like a partial, but it's something that you want to be able to use anywhere on the website. And you don't want to depend on that view or that page having information to be bound to. Okay. So it's separate. So if you think about MVC and you've got a page and then you're like, but I also want to include this other thing, but it's not in the model. So now you're kind of in this weird, like, oh, what do I do? And that's what a view component solves for you. So it's a thing that you can plug in throughout the site.
So I might use that, like, I know this is the classic example, but I might use that for like a shopping cart, something that I just need to be able to add to any page. Okay.
Yeah, shopping cart or like a status thing or whatever.
Okay.
A call out. So. Brady mentioned this, and I think this is neat, that once you can use inject pretty much anywhere. So ASP.NET Core has like configuration, and it's kind of floating around. And so here he just said he injected the iConfiguration, and then he's able to just call out to it. So you can also do that with services. So you can say like, I've got a service, and I can just say stat service and just call in and have it bind to that. So what's neat about this is I don't have to do anything extra in my page model. I can just directly inject that service into the page.
Okay.
Okay, two other real quick ones. Razer class libraries. So Razer class libraries are basically, you can write a .razer file and now it's a component. And Jeff Fritz uses these in his tag helper pack. He uses these in his Blazor, what is it called? It's like Blazor helpers for web forms. And the idea is there's tons of people that have existing web forms applications like this, and they want to be able to move to using modern .NET. They want to use, .NET 5. They want all the cool hotness. And they want to kind of modernize their applications. So here's an example where this is an application, and he's updated that to now this is all Razer. So he's used the same names. So if you look, here's this is ASP : this is the old style. This is the new type, and these are all just Blazor tag helpers. And when he did this, he just went through and created all these different things. So for instance, here's a literal tag. He just did .razor, and just like this is the code for it. So the one that I reference in here is like, here he's got label.razor. So this is like all the code for it. And then this is the backend for it. So he basically exposes a parameter to bind to, and then he sets it in here, and that's all you have to do. So I got one last one that I want to show off. Since Scott Hanselman took my cache one, I had to come up with something else. So this is kind of an esoteric one, but if you need to jump between something else and C#, but you don't want to have to write like a whole bunch of code to kind of transfer back and forth, you can use this special thing here. So this says, run this little bit of C# code. So where this is nice is if you want to, you're mostly in, like you're writing a bunch of JavaScript maybe, or a bunch of inline C# or CSS, and you want to inject just a tiny little bit of C#, that works there. So here's an example. This loop does this @for, because this is just standard Razer syntax. And then this, I want to be able to just write out just a little string of C# into my JavaScript. So the reason for doing that is like here, I've got a chart. This is some standard JavaScript, and I don't want to have to kind of jump back and forth. So this little thing down at the bottom where it's got this data points, this is JavaScript, but I want to add in some C# code into it to call a random number. So I just use this, and I've heard people call this the Elvis operator. I forget, it's got some kind of funky operator name, but so here's the example of what that generates. So yeah, just an example. So I guess the big takeaway is like Razer is designed to be simple. It's mostly HTML with a little bit of C# code in when you need it. And then you can do quite a bit more. And for like, the more kind of what's coming sort of thing, we did recently a community stand-up with the Razer team. And they showed all this more stuff they're building, like, snippets and like tons of stuff with like code formatting and all sorts of stuff, coloration, all this stuff. So this is stuff that's kind of coming and that they're working on. But so the Razer team continues to kind of crank away at all this stuff.
That's awesome. Perfect. I think maybe you can answer this in 30 seconds. We're going to find out. 30 seconds. Can you make a client-side web component that's going to be fetchable as just like a small portion of a page?
Yes.
Okay.
So yeah.
And that's done with a partial, correct?
Okay, so the idea is you want client-side. Yes, you could do that with a partial. I would need to think more about how I would actually do this.
Okay.
But yeah. But you definitely can do that. There's a few different patterns you could use for that. This is something too where I'd start to look at Blazor for doing that.
Yeah. Yep.
So
yeah. That's a perfect place to end. We actually have Cecil Phillip coming on in a couple of weeks to talk about Blazor. So that'll be perfect. That's a perfect way to end. Jon, thank you so much for coming on, chatting about Razer. It's always just wonderful to catch up and just have a conversation and just your smiling face. So I appreciate that.
And now we're both hungry for pizza too. So.
Yes. So I'm going to go do that. And everybody else, thank you for tuning in. This is Web Wednesday, and we're back again next week doing something, and I can't remember what. I should at some point, make a note of what it is that's next week so I could actually tease it properly. But
just write it on your hand.
There we go. Yep. All right. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday or your Thursday, depending where you happen to be. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.